Okay, well, I think I see this topic come up every once in a while. I just saw it pop up on Twitter in some discussion somewhere, and basically it's this whole thing about being principled and following adhering to your principles and whether or not that's a good idea. Because what I saw recently was this guy, I guess, some sort of right winger, nominally right wing, uh, having this whole Twitter rant about how the reason the right loses is because they stick to their principles, and the side that wins is the one that doesn't have principles. So I don't get why so many right wingers are caught up on this idea of always having principles and doing the right thing, and then hey, you're all losers. And for me, I mean, what I would say right off the bat is, why, if that's all you care about, like if you have no principles whatsoever and you just want to drop them to win, then join the other side.
Yeah.
What other thing do you have to do than to just join the winning side, right?
Let's
There's no
immediately.
point
We can cut
Go
through
ahead.
90% of the bullshit on this topic immediately by distinguishing tactics and principles. Firstly,
Yeah.
because obviously we're not against changing tactics as long as those tactics fall within the realm of our principles. For instance, if they're like, oh, you have to groom children to win, to beat them. You have to beat them at their own game. I'd be like, pardon, excusez-moi, sir. Like, let's go
Well,
have
yeah,
a meeting
there you go.
outside.
Because that's exactly what it comes down to in those types of discussions. Like, obviously, if you grilled the guy on that particular topic, he wouldn't drop that principle. Like, if the guy calls himself a right winger, there's probably a reason that he prefers one side over the other. And I don't really like the left right divide, generally speaking, in these discourses, because in a lot of cases it doesn't really mean anything. But nominally, it's an aid to help describe these types of discussions. But obviously, that guy isn't going to drop the grooming thing. He's not going to join going to be pro grooming. So he has that hang up. He probably has tons of hang up that would make him not drop certain principles to join the other side just for the sake of winning. So then ultimately that whole talking point of principles making you a loser doesn't really stick. It doesn't really mean anything.
I know what he's talking about. He's talking about mainstream conservatives and their principle of, and I think this is a fundamental principle of them, of losing. But, okay, that doesn't apply to us. We have never had a problem, especially historically, of even, look how the Italians dealt with their Antifa in the 30s.
Right.
If that's what he means by we have to drop the principles, is that we need to go get the castor oil out, I mean, I guess I'm with him, because that's not against our principles. That was not dropping our principles. That would be applying our principles. But if he means that we should become shitheads, shitbags, randomly violent, instead of calculatedly so, or if we should endorse, we can think of some big pundits who like to endorse things of the other side, like some people who like Macron and stuff for maybe reasons that extend beyond pure geopolitics. Then yeah, you're cucking, as we used to say. We have principles for a reason, because that's how we want the world to be. If we act against our principles, the world will not be, and your immediate environment will not be how you want it to be. Therefore, you will have lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least for me, I'm here because I want, because I have morals and certain beliefs, and I genuinely want good things to happen. I want to live in a healthy society. I want people to flourish. So the idea that you drop aspects that might make you lose, even if you stick to morals, there's a chance that you might expose yourself to some weakness somewhere, but that doesn't really matter. You still find a way to win despite that. And here's an example I'll use. Okay, you play a lacrosse game. Now, you want to be the winning team. You want to be successful on the floor. The best teams stick to a system. They have strong discipline. They're not doing stupid penalties just to get ahead. They're not dirtying everyone. Genuinely speaking, the top teams, the ones that are winning, aren't getting by being dirty and underhanded and unprincipled. Now, that's not to say you don't have your guy with the big wood stick ready to go beat someone down if the game gets out of hand. Okay, you might have that. You have that wood stick on the bench just in case, but you're not playing like that because again, you have you can only run a good system if you stick to the principles of that system. As soon as you get undisciplined, you let everything fall apart, then the system doesn't work anymore, and now you're subject to playing what we call jungle ball, where it's just a mess. And
let's take it a step further.
Yeah,
the McSorley incident in hockey, of course, is the same thing. Everybody knows you chirp, you do a little. There's some within the realm of reason. There's some cheating you do, and the ref isn't looking.
Right,
and that's good. That's part of the principle of the game. Now McSorley went and I think was charged even with like attempted manslaughter. Everyone, I think across the board, I don't think I've ever met anyone who would defend that action of slashing a guy in the head like that. He not only hurt that, like, this awful situation, but he put the whole sport in a certain amount of vulnerability because now they crack down on the fights too. They crack down on all the violence.
Right.
So he exposed by dropping the principles of the game. I mean, let's say he won that one-on-one battle with that guy. I think he won it quite handily. Now, but he's put his whole team, his coach, his teammates, and the sport in general, he made it worse.
Yeah. So that's basically that. I guess that would be the other side of it. Would be where the lack of ability to have morals, to restrain your behavior, to be disciplined, just like ruins it for everyone else. Like you said, exposes the game to higher levels of scrutiny and is cracked down on. And then on the other aspect of things, where I guess dialing into these conservative types where their principles don't allow them to act whatsoever. That would be the type of, the principle of we won't even have a wood stick on the bench because we're above that. And then when it comes to the guy beating down your players, and maybe you have a crazy McSorley type on the other team coming after your top guy. Well, you threw the wood stick away, and you have nothing to defend yourself with. But you weren't. It's not like you were planning to play with that strategy. It's just you never know, and you have to be willing to defend.
Of course. That little bit of cheating, it's the same in boxing. It's the same in most sports. There's this rule bending. That's the actual principle of the game that goes beyond the rules. But anyway, let's talk hockey for a second. Who would you say is the best goon team of all time?
I honestly couldn't tell you, man.
I think a lot of... Okay. Well, next time we have a CCC guest who knows about hockey, I like talking about hockey goons. It's a great part of our history.
I think it's good stuff. I've played hockey for, I don't know, since I was 4. I'm 25 now, but I've just never paid attention to professional stuff ever. So.
Oh yeah. This is just a sports podcast now too. As Canadians, we have to make an exception for hockey. We apologize to we apologize to no one. Go fuck yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Why would we apologize to anyone? It's like, what other sport? You got lacrosse and hockey. There's no other sport for us.
Boxing's a sport, but it's
Well, I mean, like just for us.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is just for us. Yeah, those are it. But did you know a Canadian invented basketball? No one cares.
Yeah, who's playing basketball now?
Yeah, I'm not legally allowed to answer that question. But I wouldn't leave my bike unlocked outside of a basketball game. Anyway. Simple topic. Yeah, we have principles. If you don't follow them, you're not one of us.
Yeah, and again, going back to the start of the discussion, like if you really care that much about winning, that you don't feel like you have to follow any sort of take a principled stance or a moral stance, and in these struggles, then like you might as well just join the winning team. If you really are serious about that take, then that's the logical conclusion. But I don't think anyone pushing that is genuinely sincere. They're just, taking pot shots and trying to be edgy in their hot takes. Nothing really valuable in that approach. Be moral. We're good. The whole point is that we are the good side. We have truth, and we follow morals. So stick to that. All right, so we got Mike here from Imperium Press. I think at this point, Mike, you're pretty well known in these spheres, but for the new and uninitiated, can you give us a quick rundown of your background, where you're from, the work you do, what ideas you've been exploring recently?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on, guys. I am editor-in-chief of Imperium Press. My name's Mike, the company was launched officially it was launched in late 2019, so it's only been about 2.5 years or whatever, but it's done very well, better than I expected, and it's sort of gained a name for itself. So what we do basically is, what it started out as is that we were repackaging and republishing classics that were either neglected, like, some more obscure stuff, or that where you could, if you find an edition of it, it's full of pause and it just really desperately needs to be reissued from an our guy perspective. So that's what it kind of started out as, but very quickly, and in fact, before we even released anything, we started to put together books for contemporary authors in the radical right scene, nationalist scene. And we kind of had a big hit sort of right out of the gate with a book called Nemesis by Chris Bond. And we had an excellent book as well shortly after that by a generative anthropology blogger who, we just basically kind of exploded right out of the gate and things started going very well for us. So we decided we were going to do more of that. And since then, we've published contemporary authors such as Josh Neal, Thomas 777, and most recently Academic Agent. And of course, in the meantime, we've continued to put out classics. And our goal basically is to put out an entire library of classics that could fill a university library. So we'll get there. For now, I think we've got a pretty good library of titles. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of what Imperium Press is all about.
And so you're a Canadian, hey? A lot of Leafs were surprised about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background in Canada and your ethnicity, the whole deal there?
Well, it's interesting. I actually did. I did one of those DNA tests. I think some guys will be like, "Ooh, what'd you do that for?" But I got nothing to lose. Everybody knows who the fuck I am. If I'm going to get shut down by the government, they know who I am by this point. So anyway, yeah, I did one of those tests, and like my family history, in like sort of my family lore, there was a bit of a piece of lore that there was like a little bit of some sort of native Canadian at some stage in the like fairly recent past on like one side of the family. So I did the DNA test and no, sorry, it's just white all the way through, Northwestern European, mostly from of course, from the British Isles, a little bit of French and Dutch and some Scandinavian as well. So it's just basically Northwestern Euro. I mean,
was your mom trying to run an Elizabeth Warren scan or something like that?
Yeah, no, it was one of those things. I don't know. Like if it turned out to be true, there was like some potential that like depending on like how like what fraction it was that I might have been able to get, scholarship to go to university, which would have been amazing at this point. I'd have to do distance learning because I don't live in Canada anymore. But anyway, it turned out to be bogus. So yeah, that's that. And in a way, I was actually kind of relieved. But to be quite honest, I do kind of have a healthy respect for the warrior culture of some of the native tribes from Canada. So yeah, not a total ethnic and cultural chauvinist like I probably should be. But so in a way, it was a little disappointing. But yeah, that's what it is, and you've just got to face the facts. So that's my background. As for where I'm from, I'm an Ontario boy, southwestern Ontario. Lived there for a while. Moved out to BC. Uh, kind of hated it after a while, and then I decided, okay, so I got to go live somewhere else. I can't bear to live in this shit town. This extremely liberal, paused, multicultural city that you can imagine in British Columbia. And where am I going to go? Well, the natural decision is, of course, all the way across the globe and land in Australia. So through a series of random occurrences, it would seem almost, that's where I ended up. And I've been there for almost 10 years now. So I've been away from the motherland for a while, but I desperately miss it. I miss the climate. I miss the accent. I miss a lot of things about it, actually. Canada, we Canadians don't have a lot of national pride as a sort of rule. I mean, there are, of course, nationalists who do. But as far as like the man in the street, most Canadians are kind of embarrassed to be Canadian, and that's bullshit because Canada is an amazing country. We have an amazing history and a lot to be proud of. And, I don't know if you've heard of the I think it's called the conservatism of the fringes or something like that. It's the something of the fringes. Basically, what it means is that the diaspora goes, when it leaves the country, it tends to actually seriously embrace its ethnic and cultural heritage where it's from. And I know firsthand all about that. It's a very real phenomenon. I left Canada. I was a shitty libertarian. I came, here I am today. Couldn't be further away from that. Very much an illiberal sort of thinker. So I hope I didn't offend any libertarians. If you have any in your audience, I do have a little bit of
offend them away.
It, so.
If we have any in our audience, we want them very offended anyway, so that they can
okay,
come to the bright side here.
Well, hopefully,
we're big fans of bullying libertarians here.
Excellent. Well, I could have used a little of it myself, but eventually I got it, so that was good. And it purged me of all the dreck that needed to go. So, yeah, definitely got red pilled when I was down here in Australia, as many people did. I think it had a lot more to do with the time, the Trump era and a variety of other things. I was moving in that direction long before Trump, but that certainly accelerated things. But being away from the fatherland really makes you realize what you've missed. So, yeah, in a very, very brief sketch, that's kind of my background from Canada and sort of a very, very lightning round sketch of my red pilling.
So given that you're a Leaf, have you done much digging into Canadian history at all? Any ideas, any thoughts? I know a lot of guys want to hear your thoughts on Canadian history and what you think about that, education, the whole deal.
I have not actually. That is something that I still kind of have yet to do. I've obviously very, very busy with publishing, but one of the things that have as earmarked as a sort of near-term project is actually to investigate my own family history, because I've researched a lot about my paternal clan and maternal clan lineages. Because most of my background is Scottish, so very strong in the clans. And I've actually compiled quite a bit of material on that. So that's kind of my next project. But I certainly aim to delve into Canadian history very, very soon. I know a little bit about it, probably not a huge amount more than like the average Canadian, but a little bit more perhaps. And it's always irked me, like seriously, the way that Canadians don't take pride in themselves, don't take pride in their national heritage, and look down on nationalism. I mean, a lot of because politics have become so bifurcated in the modern age, like, since roughly about, I don't know, I guess 2010 or something like that, really the Obama era. It's Nationalism has kind of got a bad rap amongst quite a few people. But I remember when I was younger, growing up, like, in the 90s, had a lot of friends who were just like, thought that having pride in your country was stupid, like really ridiculously stupid, and that it's completely irrational and destructive and all of that, right? Um, and that was something that, like, even at the time when I didn't really have a great deal of knowledge about like Canada or its history or anything like that beyond my own backyard. Uh, Even then, I was like, it just rubbed me the wrong way, like severely rubbed me the wrong way. And I think in sort of like my development, just aesthetically, like as a person, the kind of music you like, the kind of literature you read, and what you're about when you're a teenager or whatever. Actually, one of the things that kind of hit me very early was romantic nationalist music of the 19th century. I've always been a huge fan of people like Modest Mussorgsky and the Russian Five in general, Edvard Grieg, and a lot of the nationalist, and of course Wagner, a lot of the nationalist music that sort of came out of that era, just swept me away, and just like, it's just so unbelievable. It really doesn't even bear any explication of why it's so good. It just kind of self-evidently is. And it caught me very early, like as a young teenager, like 12, 13 years old. So that was something that really, I loved it. I loved listening to like the Peer Gynt Suite from Edvard Grieg, and just like picturing what it's like in Norway, to be a peasant in Norway in the 1800s, and just to feel the moods and chromatic shifts just moving over you, and just like what it would be like to live in this country that's like most of it's north of the Arctic Circle. Of course, I can say the same thing for Canada, I suppose, but what it is to live there and to have that history and that ethnicity and that and their language and their culture and everything like that, to get swept away by that in the music. And the same thing with listening to pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky. This was something that this particular suite by Mussorgsky is was very, very formative for me in learning to love like just nationalism. And I'm quite a Russophile because of this music. So that caught me very early, and I started to like think about my own nationality and reasons why, to love Canada. And of course, being, I guess, the kind of person I am, I just love the sort of particularity of a place and a home. I, the town that I grew up in, I can still sort of like feel and sense the placehood of it. I don't know how to describe it, but basically it's like even just like the little forest that I used to go to from my house where I used to live. I could still kind of smell what it's like there and feel what it's like on an autumn day as the weather's kind of turning toward winter, and just everything about that. I've always had a very, very strong sense of place, and for that reason, loving things growing up like J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which he's a master at describing place and enveloping you in an environment. That as well sort of gave me a love of home, a love of country, a love of this place where you're from, as opposed to there, this and not that. It's the love of the particular. It kind of fired that in me. And so, going back to, not to digress too much, talking to my peers in high school and whatnot, and them just being like, "Oh, it's idiotic to like love being from a country, like you didn't choose that," and blah 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 blah, all these bullshit that we normally hear. It just didn't ring true with me, and I just like look at these people like they're fucking aliens. Even if they were like, they were my great friends that I still love and keep in touch with and everything like that. It just didn't make any sense to me. So nationalism has always been something near and dear, and of course that that feeds into my later development. I don't think I'm fundamentally a different person now than I was then. I'm just more consistent about it, I think. So yeah. As far as like love of country and Canadian pride, absolutely. We have a lot to be proud of, and it sort of started very early for me.
Okay, so Canadian history seems to be taught pretty poorly here. Um, People aren't very interested in it. It's kind of boring. It's bland. The way that we get taught is not something to be inspired by. Um, to me, it seems like there could be a market for something different, a better version, an exciting, an engaging version of Canadian history that gets the heart of our identity. Do you think there's a market there? You think there'd be value in having some sort of branch or some sort of education that teaches Canadians a more inspiring version of our own history?
Yeah, I do. I do think that there's a market for it, and that Canadians kind of cry out for it because everyone does, no matter where you live. The need to have roots and the need to feel connected to the soil is ubiquitous, for humanity. And it's the same in Canada as it is in America in a sense. I mean, Americans take a lot more pride in their history because they mythologize it a lot more, and that's part of why it's important to them. And of course, Americans are a lot more conservative in general, at least now, or in the latter half of the 20th century. Canadians, of course, very, very conservative through most of their history, more conservative than the Americans. I have a feeling we're going to end up shitting on the Yanks here, but I'm just not. I'm just not going to hold back. So
It's
I actually
completely
have a lot.
inevitable discussing Canada.
Yeah,
You can't do
I
one
have a
without
lot
the
of
other.
respect for Americans, like I really do, actually, and America as a country. But I don't. I also don't lionize it. I'm not an American, and I can see where its flaws are. And but one of its strengths is the mythologizing of its history. It actually has a kind of mythos. Uh, the tall tales of like Paul Bunyan and all these things, and even the tall tales of its founders. This like there was no equivalent for me growing up in Canada learning about our founders. It was all just very matter of fact and very taught very poorly, with no zest or zeal or love or passion at all, not at
Did
all.
did
So
you ever
I
by
didn't
chance
really learn it.
did you ever by chance read any W.O. Mitchell or Stephen Leacock or anything like that when you were a kid? But
No, actually, and this is one of the things is that uh, my literary introduction to Canadian, literary history was very drab and boring. I actually had to I took this class in high school, and I had to like repeat it, and I didn't even pass it the second time because it was so uninteresting. The like things that they offered us to read. So anyway, yeah, sorry that.
Margaret Lawrence is good, but doesn't offer a lot of appeal to a young boy. But something
Yeah.
like W.O. Mitchell, it's Jake and the Kid, might have most of the seeds we need for our own Paul Bunyan, like given some time.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like there are seeds there that are like to be planted and that can sprout or like in the fullness of time. It's just the Canadians are not really exposed to it the way that Americans are. And yeah, you're right. I mean, Margaret Atwood. It's like that was one of the that was one of the things that was offered to me to read in this high school class. I tried to fight my way through Douglas something or other. I can't even remember his name. He's like a kind of like almost like cyberpunk author, like modernist author from the 90s. Douglas with two S's. I can't remember what like his last name actually is.
Hmm.
Anyway, I did not enjoy that. Tried Robertson Davies on the second go. Wasn't really that into that one either.
I'll bet you'd like Robertson Davies now.
I probably would actually, but not in high school.
He's a little
It's
dense for
interesting.
high school.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, like, being, a 17, 18-year-old boy reading this stuff, it's like it's too domestic. It's too sort of austere. It's too I don't know. It's just not what I was looking for, kind of thing. When in other high school classes reading the literature, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it actually because I was reading a lot of dystopian fiction, and I loved that. That was really cool for me. And amazingly, check this check this out here. Uh, excuse me. In high school, I did a class, an English class, where we read Hesiod's Theogony. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It is the where it's like the series of myths by one of the oldest Greek poets, where he sets down the birth of the gods and the struggles that they go through, and what's called the Titanomachy, which is basically the sort of transition from like one generation of gods like Uranus and Saturn, well, not Saturn, but Cronus, all the way to Zeus, and how Zeus basically sort of usurps the throne and kills them all and like reigns forever and whatnot. It's very colorful stuff, and it's very grotesque stuff. It's very like Plato comes along much later and he's like, we can't have anybody reading that. It's like reading fucking porn or something like that. They almost, and you can see why he says that. And we read this in high school. It was amazing, and I think that gave me a taste for Greek myth, actually. But then when it came to the Canadian literature class, it was a lot less interesting to me, so it didn't really catch me. But yeah, the Americans, they definitely have a lot more of a mythos about them. But at the same time, American culture is a break with the past. It's a hard break with the old country. And Canadian identity is very much a continuation of Britishness or Frenchness, depending where you're from. So it's, I think, it has a lot more potential for like real conservatism and reaction even, and illiberalism, to be honest. Obviously, there is a sort of permafrost of like disgusting modernity and pause that needs to be broken through. But if that can be broken through and we can tap into our roots, the sort of roots that a writer like George Grant offers us, and others as well, that I think that there's actually a serious potential in Canada to be extremely red-pilled as a people. But, and the thing is for us, like as it is for the Americans, our country is something like 300 years old or 350 years old, that kind of thing. It's not very old. In other words, if you've ever traveled in Europe, you're immediately struck by the deep history that you're surrounded by on all sides. Here's a building that like was built half a millennium ago. We have none of those in Canada. So it's something very different living in England or something like that. There's a connection to the soil there that is very, very deep. But we as Canadians have sort of maintained some of the continuity with the old world, whereas Americans have made a kind of hard break with it and are only sort of very tenuously sort of fumbling towards a connection with the old world. I think the radical right is beginning that. But we in Canada, there's a lot more potential for it because up until something like the 1960s, we considered ourselves essentially British. So this is, or a continuation of the British as part of the Commonwealth. So this is something there's a lot of potential in Canadian identity for that. And there's a lot of work to be done. But if the work is done, then I think that Canada could become extremely based over just a couple of generations. So, there's some hope for the future.
And despite our lack of length of history, I feel like journeying to a new continent and inhabiting the wild plains and all that is bonus points. It counts for, a few hundred or, maybe 1,000 years of history in itself as far as mythos building and stuff like that. So we might have a little bonus score there.
Yeah, I really like that juxtaposition between Canadians of having that continuity with the old world versus Americans having that split with the old world. And I think there's a lot there in Canadian identity that we can build off of. And there's a lot that's kind of been maybe you could say covered up. But for example, early Canadian identity was people tried to shape it. Like, for example, this sort of industrialist George Beers, I believe his name was, tried to tie Canadian identity to lacrosse, and what he saw it as was this sort of is symbolic of Canadians conquering the wild, savage land, and lacrosse being this sport, this aspect of culture of a wild, savage people, being reappropriated for the use of the European settlers, in the same way that this unforgiving land, this savage land, was reappropriated for the use of the Canadian settlers. So he saw this as implicit in Canadian identity, and it's aspects of this that really seem to go untold, unspoken about, and sort of forgotten from the construction of modern Canadian identity. So I think, and you tell me if you agree or not, but that would be these kinds of things need to be developed for Canadian identity to sort of spring forth.
Yeah, well, obviously education is a big part of it. Delving into the history, making it known, writing, rewriting history, not like rewriting it as in making shit up, but rewriting it in a way, retelling it, I guess, is a better way of saying it. Like, you think of something like the Kalevala, which is a series of like epic poetry that was collected in the 19th century by a Finnish guy, from the countryside, basically collecting their traditional myths and stories and songs and everything like that. What are our traditional songs and stories? Well, these are we certainly have them. They just need to be collected. They need to be. I'm sure that to a large degree they have been collected, but they just need to be promulgated. And this is the way a mythos is built, and to take pride, and these kinds things kind of start at home, teaching your children to take pride as Canadians and not just to be non-Americans or un-Americans, which sadly the British are pretty much, that's their cultural identity too. It's very sad to see for an ancient culture. Thinking of ourselves as here I am going to somewhat contradict myself by comparing ourselves to other Americans. The Americans have a real sense of themselves as pioneers. They came to this continent, they conquered the wilderness, they found something very wild and undomesticated, and then they put it under cultivation. But we as Canadians, we came to the same continent and we saw what sort of lands the Americans were cultivating. We were like, fuck that. Soft lands make for soft men. We're going to go north and we're going to conquer the real badass territory. So, I mean, like, we as Canadians are the descendants of total Chads that decided to conquer the most inhospitable territory on this continent and did it. And in some ways, I think the fact that our ancient forebears or our forebears from the pioneer days were so badass is kind of part of why we have a Trudeau today, and that is part of Canadian identity. It's something to do. I don't know what it is. If anybody can figure it out, please call the office. There's something like a historical law or something like that the most barbaric, the most based, and the most badass peoples end up to be so domesticated. You can see this with like the Scottish clansmen. What does Scotland look like today? Well, what it looks like is that you've got a law that says you can't be racist in your own house. Whereas rewind the clock back 200-300 years and you had these bloody intergenerational feuds between the different clans in the Scottish Highlands, and especially in the lowlands. So this is like, this is the transition of a people from one extreme to the other.
I disagree. I do have a theory on this, though. Because once you become a certain amount of rugged and Chad, the governance of lesser men and all that becomes basically a household duty. It becomes women's work almost. You're concerned with building spaceships to Mars, or a fur trading company that extends the entire length of the Laurentian or whatever, and you don't really care what your neighbors are doing regarding road maintenance policy or other trivial shit like that. You become so Chad that the whole idea of governance falls beneath you, almost like that. I mean, in the early days, we still had strong statesman-like guys, but the general attitude of our best people now is ruggedly individualistic in a way that might prohibit them from ruling. And so we wind up with women ruling or Trudeau, take your pick. That is just
which
a
is
theory.
almost the same thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, that makes I can see where you're coming from in that, and it kind of would make sense in the context of the Northwestern Europeans, especially the Norse and Scandinavians, the way that their history has sort of proceeded. But there is something there. There's a kind of historical law, and it's related to the, you know, good times make for weak men thing that just seems to be inescapable. And it's so it was with Canadians. I think that pound for pound, man for man, we obviously went toe to toe with the Americans early in our history and came out victorious. So Canadians have a lot to look back on in terms of manliness and masculinity, and to take pride in that. We are some of the most rugged explorers of all time, and how the mighty have fallen. But it begins with taking pride in that and teaching your children and your family about that history, and to be proud to be Canadian, or to be, in my case, my children, to be to have Canadian roots, and that is something that they do take pride in. So that's the beginning of it, and that's how a mythos builds. Basically, it sort of builds from the ground up. It's folk culture, and Canada has quite a strong folk culture, or a series of folk cultures. It's very, it's very local and regional, and that's beautiful. That's something great. There's a sense in which Canada might be more than one country, and I believe this wholeheartedly about America. I think America is at least 4 different countries. But without digressing into that, this can also be part of how Canadian culture and folk culture can be revived. It's to realize that the people who live on the East Coast are vastly different than the people who live on the prairies, who are different from the people who live on the Sunshine Coast and all of that and whatnot. But that there is something common that we share, and of course different from the French Canadians. But that there is something common that we share, but you have to really celebrate your local culture, and that's kind of where the pride kind of builds up from.
It's better to have elves and dwarves in the lands of men than it's more an interesting mythos anyway. We can all be fighting the same common evils and fighting Mordor together or whatever, but yeah, it works good that way anyway. It makes it more interesting.
Yeah, you really have to start from where you live, right? And this is kind of goes back to the point I was saying about how, like, I look very fondly back on my hometown. I can sort of still feel the placehood of it. And that is sort of the beginning of my pride as a Canadian. A pride, first my pride is from being from X town, and then it kind of moves to being an Ontarian, and then from there on to being a Canadian and whatnot. Like I say, I think that there's a sense in which Canada is more than one country. Certainly, it's at least 2. I love and have great respect for the Quebecois, for the French Canadians. But to be honest, I think that they should have their own country. And when I remember when the Meech Lake Accords, I was old enough, just barely, to like sort of kind of understand what was going on. With my parents explained it to me. And I remember at the time being like, what are these French people doing? Why would they break up Canada? This is ridiculous. They should just accept that we're one country. They should speak fucking English and just be like the rest of us. And I could not understand it. I could not understand how they would want to hang on to their unique culture. But boy, has my tune changed as I've gotten older, and I really do appreciate and understand where they're coming from, sort of thing. So not to advocate breaking up the country or whatever as a point of Canadian pride, but it's just to say that I think that we have to understand that true nationalism is fundamentally a kind of regionalism, and that's kind of where it starts, and that's where national pride kind of builds up from.
So if that's the case, then Canada is almost by definition an empire from the start. If it's
or at least a federation at the very least. Yeah.
I mean, we can work with that too. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
the regional or provincial identity seems to be the sentiment a lot of guys in our spheres, a lot of Canadians seem to resonate with. In our talks with different guys from around the country, they all seem to be converging on that idea of having these sort of provincial identities. Especially guys in Alberta, for example, they feel more strongly a sort of Albertan prairie identity rather than a just Canadian identity. Now, there's that overarching sense of being Canadian for all these guys, but definitely there seems to be value in being more regional with our approach, and I think that's the way that things will have to go. Is these more localized, regionalized identities overarched by this broader Canadian identity?
Yeah, I do actually. Not as it relates to Canada specifically, although like it basically would be workable in that context. Basically, it needs to start with the family. I mean, there's a lot of we talk a lot in our circles about social change being top down, about governance basically flowing from the top and being something kind of like absolutist in a way. This, of course, flows out of the neo-absolutist school that so influenced our thing. Chris Bond and Adam Katz and all of that. But at the same time, I think more foundationally, things really do kind of like build from the bottom up. And I hope this isn't sort of like vestigial liberal priors of mine. I think a good way to put it is there's an aphorism somewhere in Beyond Good and Evil, Friedrich Nietzsche's book, where he talks about the fact that the flower is the point, the kind of telos of the plant. That's what it's for. That's what it's moving towards. That's its goal, is to flower and to have this like beautiful cultural efflorescence. Basically, it's a metaphor. He's saying that a society is about producing a few great men and producing a high culture. But, and this is a very important caveat, that high culture is only as healthy as the soil. The plant is only as healthy as the soil. The flower is only going to flower if the soil is rich and healthy and tended to. And that soil is basically folk culture. So there is a kind of, yes, okay, sovereignty is top down, indivisible, but at the same time, there's a kind of dialectical process here where the high culture and the quote low culture, or shall we say the folk culture, are in a kind of entangled relationship. You can't really separate the health of one from the health of the other. And where I'm kind of going with this is that the ultimate institution that is going to make for a healthy high culture, which we have none of now, is or very little of, is the family. That's the ultimate institution that needs to be rebuilt and rethought and restructured, because the family, of course, now, and this is the case all across the West and seeping into the rest of the world like a cancer, the family is very deeply unhealthy as the nuclear family, and moving on from the nuclear family to a single mother household, and then from a single mother household to just a guy that like lives alone in an apartment and watches porn all day. That's kind of like where the family is heading. It's been unhealthy for a super long time. It looked a lot more healthy when it was something like more east of the Hajnal line, or the extended family, basically the clan structure. Basically, the clan structure and the extended family is what we need to revive. I lived in a city where there was a lot of Indian people and a lot of East Asian people, and their family structure is much more healthy than ours. They have intergenerational households that are divided with, into a duplex where you've got grandma and grandpa and like the kids, but also like grandma and grandpa, mums and dads, but also like cousins and things like living in this house. You got like, maybe quite a large house. It's got like a dozen people or 15, 16 people living in it. That is a healthy environment. That's what a family really looks like. That's what a household looks like. We as Northwestern Europeans lost that some time ago. It's not clear why. There's a lot of theories as to how that happened, but it happened and it needs to be reversed. So this is the first institution that needs to be rebuilt, and that's the one that's in the long run. If that doesn't get rebuilt, it does not matter how many national vanguards we put together. It's just never going to take. The soil is too unhealthy. So that's the first thing that needs to be rebuilt. But of course, as the publishing company, I mean, I don't want to say too much about like what's going on behind the scenes here, but basically we have ambitions to do more than just put out books. We would like to basically become an educational institution, put out a syllabus, and start training guys to be basically leaders going forward, and to be able to do things like start their own law firm, start their own any number of things that are required to build the kind of institutional backbone that's going to allow us to oppose, the global order or whatever. This is not this is not something it's not a battle that's going to be won overnight. I really think that Trump was a real white pill for people, and people thought, oh, well, maybe it's just a couple of election cycles before we basically take the whole ship back. No, it's going to be centuries. We're not going to win for centuries, and we need to sort of cultivate that mindset and start building brick by brick, because everybody wants a Band-Aid solution to like third stage cancer, and it just it needs to be much more fundamental than that. So we're hopefully Imperium Press is kind of like laying the foundations, doing the very, very beginning work to sort of start the process of turning things around. But we've got to really sort of think of it as a long-term project, and I think, between reviving the folk culture and doing that, thinking in long terms, in the longest terms, that's a good start. That's kind of how we can start building institutions.
It's funny you say all that, because Charles and I were just talking about self-generating institutions this morning. Or I don't know if you read my text, but I was texting him. But we're like noting that a university trains professors who then go work as a monks or a monastery monks, right? So it's interesting. I wonder what a institution that's built out of a printing press would look like, especially with that telos in mind. I think it could be it's an interesting seed to plant to start that. We were contemplating the same thing with we were imagining the same thing with online services or IT or something like that. There's a few different places you could start these things, and I hope a lot of them take root.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've noticed, being a publisher and being a business that has to survive by generating profit. I mean, we have a bottom line. We have to stick to a budget. We have to have deadlines, these kind of things, right? It's not just a hobby, in other words. One of the things that we need to do is we need to get in touch with people who can do things occasionally. We need to have people who can do graphic design. We need to have people who can upgrade our website. We need to have people who can do this and do that. Basically, what the dissident right needs now is it needs people who can do shit. It needs people who have real practical skills. It doesn't need that many more people who are good at having opinions. It doesn't need that many more amateur philosophers.
Hallelujah.
What it really needs is it needs practical skills. And this is one of the things that I'm hoping that we can help cultivate. And this is where we can differentiate ourselves a little bit from, I mean, there are lots of people who are putting out things like courses and whatnot, and some of them are doing excellent work, and some of their courses are very good. But what we would like to do as an institution is to basically like train guys to be able to organize themselves into guilds and things like that. Have a sort of red-pilled plumbers union or something like that, or guys who can like run security at an event. That would be very useful, wouldn't it? It would be useful for nationalists in a sort of immediate way, but it'd be also useful to do things like train people in law, of course, because we need a legal sort of institutional backbone as well. All these things, like when you
Marketing,
really
business administration, so many different
That's right.
fields we need.
Yeah, we don't just need more podcasts. We need a lot of other things. I mean, we do
Present
need
company
good
excluded.
Yeah, well, we do need more podcasts, but that's not all we need. We need a lot of other things too, and this is what we're kind of moving towards. The very early stages. Of course, we are a publishing company, and we're not going to lose sight of what we're fundamentally about, because that's how these projects get run into the ground. But at the same time, we got to start thinking in broader terms. We got to start thinking in less, we got to start thinking in lower time preference terms, and that's kind of where we're going with it. And it's going to be a while. It's not going to, even if Imperium Press continues to the end of my life, it's just going to be the beginning. It's going to have to be taken on. It's going to be a multi-generational institution. It's going to have to go on much, much longer than what I am doing. So yeah.
Do you think there's any chance that do you think there's any chance that the internet and time speeding up might be able to compress your timeline there?
I hope so, but I don't know that that's really going to be able to accelerate the one thing that really needs to be rebuilt, which I've talked about, which is the family. As a people, we need to rebuild ourselves in terms of everything I talked about with making the family healthy and integral and whole again. But at the same time, we need to rebuild our birth rates as well. And I think if the family structure is healthy, then you're going to start to see that 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 children per woman start to tick up a little bit. And that's something that we need to turn around, because otherwise, I mean, if that continues in the direction that it's going, then the game is over anyway. So, that's not to say that the game is over now, or that we should be really black-pilled about that. I mean, there's 700 million of us in the world. If you want to look at the white people as an ethnicity or whatever, there's a lot of us there. So we're not going to go extinct anytime soon. But this is something that needs to be turned around, and it's a very hard question. Why don't we want to have children? Why do we not take our own side? These are hard questions. So I don't really see that that's going to be solved overnight, but definitely I see where you're coming from. There's a lot else that can be done very, very quickly. And, the fact is that social change is very much elite versus elite. And if something was to happen, if there was a kind of disaffected elite that was to go rogue and sort of move in our direction, even slightly in our direction, especially if they were to give us institutional backing, or even just sort of run cover for us to be able to do things like be racist on Twitter, for example.
Yeah, we just had a little taste of that a couple days ago there. It was beautiful. It was so much fun.
This would help us, right? Like, things can change very quickly. Think about what your life was like in 2015. I don't know how old you guys are, but if you were, not a teenager, if you were an adult in 2014, 2015, and you sort of like had an idea of like what the political landscape looked like back then, it was very bleak for us. And maybe even you weren't on this side of the fence yet, as many of us weren't. But now look at what's happened. And how did that happen? Why did that happen? It happened because one guy decided to run for president, basically. There was a lot of currents that were pushing us in this direction. It was certainly not Trump by himself that created the dissident right, or the radical right, or the nationalist right. But he certainly stepped on the gas. So things can change very quickly. And right now, it's all up in the air. There's a lot of potential. And there will always be a lot of potential, because we live in a system of immense complexity. And the more complex the system is, the more fragile it is, especially in modernity. So things can change very quickly, but the one thing that won't change quickly is the family, and that's the one thing that we need to work on the most.
Yeah, I think those foundational support structures are essential, because if you try and build too far ahead without having the proper foundations, things can collapse or fall apart quite easily. Like if I'll draw an example of strength training or muscle building, if you try and accelerate your strength and your muscle size before you build those foundational structures, like training the ligaments, making sure the body, the core can handle all the added stress, then you'll face injury. It won't last very long if you're not taking the time to make sure that you have those fundamental structures established and rooted in the first place. So in our context, we have to make sure that we have strong families. People know how to be a part of communities and raise their children in a healthy way. So there's some longevity there.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen this start to turn around in very sort of like limited communities. In my own experience, like say for example a kind of insular Catholic community. I mean, they do have somewhat higher birth rates. I think it's a little oversold that the Catholics are like have like 4 and 5, 6 children per family or whatever, but they do have higher birth rates, and part of the reason is because they stick together and they have a church and they all worship together and they're a community. Having a community is such an enormous boon for the family. Of course, the community is built up out of families, but there's a sense in which the family is built on the community as well. If you have ever, as I have, moved to a new place where you don't know anyone and you have a young family, that is extremely, extremely hard, because you don't have the support network, you don't have the cousins, you don't have the you don't have like the church that you've gone to all your life or whatever. You just basically, it's you and your wife and your kids, a little island in the middle of an ocean, and it's very hard to sort of it's hard to make things happen. It's if a child gets sick, it's like, who takes time off work, or if you just need a break, if mom is just like has had enough, it's like who's going to babysit? Well, I guess it's dad, but dad's got to work, and it gets very, very complicated if you don't have this huge network of support, cousins and church ladies and all of these people. That's what you need. That's what, having that kind of solidarity in that community is going to raise birth rates if you're kind of a birth rate maximalist. And I have seen this before, like I say, in Catholic communities and amongst, the sort of tighter knit sort of churches.
Mennonites, Hutterites.
Oh, definitely, especially those folks. But I've also seen it in things like the Asatru community of, basically folkish pagans. I've seen these communities where you get these people that sort of join it, and they're just these sort of like individuals that are interested in the theological aspect of it, and then they over time they come out of it with families of like 3 and 4 kids and stuff like that, because they've got a support network, they've got people that they could stick together with, and that's what you need if you want the birth rates to go up. If this is something you're very, very concerned about, then you need a community, basically, and you don't really sort of feel the loss of that until you move somewhere and you have a family kind of thing, but you don't have any support network. So it's a variety of solutions, and of course community building is a huge part of that, and that's something that guys need to be trained for as well. I mean, it's how do you build a community? How do you make friends? How do you meet people when you've moved somewhere, kind of thing? This is like, it's the kind of shit your parents are supposed to teach you, but your parents are too busy. They're working, right? So it's a catch-22.
No wonder the pickup artists had such success a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly. There's a sort of like hole where a father should be. And yeah, so this is, I mean, Imperium Press is not going to solve all these problems. Of course, we can just kind of chip away at a very, very limited sphere. But there's, there's hope on the horizon. There are people who are doing this, and yeah, I think I could see it turning around. It's guys get really black pilled in our circles. What's the solution? Everything's getting worse. I'm just going to kind of give up and go on to Telegram chats and blackpill everyone else. No, I think there's actually quite a lot of reason for hope. At the very least, that people recognize the problem. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager in my early 20s, nobody knew there was a fucking problem. Nobody that I talked to was even aware of any of this. And so that at least is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think we need to overcome that blackpilling, and I think it comes from two sides. Part of that is teaching younger men how to have those families, and filling the hole that their fathers may have left. And I see communities that have older guys that have families that are providing that support, and I think that's very valuable, and that can help both ends of the spectrum overcome blackpilling, knowing that there's guys that are successful with families that are older than you, while those older guys seeing potential in the younger. So I think that's essential in the community building. Now, a lot of what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about on your interview with Keith Woods, the hearth, having that center of support, the network, and having somewhere to grow forth from, to be stable and solid, having a foundation. Now that hearth, do you think the religious associations are necessary, or can it be? Do you have any ideas for what can be done without a religious association?
Well, disappointingly, I don't really have I don't really have anything that I can point to outside of a kind of religious community. I really do think that that's the solution. Basically, is that the family needs not to sort of keep flogging this horse of the family, but the family built up into the clan, built up into the community, built up into the city, built up into the state, built up into the nation. Basically, at every stage of these concentric circles that are gathered around wider and wider hearths, it needs to be all based on a kind of religious association. Because to give a little bit of background for guys who are not familiar, that talk that I gave on Keith Wood's channel was about a book called The Ancient City, which basically explains how the original Indo-European family and social structure worked. And basically how it worked was each family was a religious association even before it was a blood association. So each family basically was headed by a house father. The house father was the sort of high priest, commander-in-chief, and sole proprietor of the family, and also the supreme judge of the family. He was like a little absolute monarch of his family. And basically what he did was primarily he led the rites of the worship of his paternal line. This was the religion that basically undergirded what came later in the religion of Zeus and the religion of Brahma and all of these Indo-European paganisms and Hinduism and whatnot. Back when all of these peoples lived together in Central Asia as tribes, they were ancestor worshippers. And this is what the family was kind of built out of. So that's what the sort of originary family looked like. And of course, as this family sort of branched out, it became a series of families, and these series of families would look back to the original ancestor that gave rise to all of them. They would of course all be gathered around their own hearths, but then from time to time they would the heads of the families would themselves get together in an association, and the eldest son out of all of those families would be like a clan chieftain that would then lead the worship of the what's called the gens, at least in the Roman, called the gens or the genos in Greek. So this is basically the clan, and you get this hearth that's basically a association of hearths, and then that keeps going and it keeps branching out like that. And then you get an association of a variety of clan chieftains that all have their own families under them. and then that is basically the tribe, and it just keeps going like this. You get this concentric circles on top of concentric circles, and eventually grows up into the city-state, which is the largest association in the Bronze and Iron Age, basically, of these Aryan or Indo-Europeans. But the point I'm making is that at every stage, it's a religious association. It has to be a sort of like gathering around. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be pagan. There is very, very strong echoes of this same structure in the Roman Catholic Church.
Or the family
Roman
reunion barbecue, I guess, is a...
Well, that's it, and it's kind of like secular, affectation, right? That's the sort of echo that's come down to us, and that's the place to start, right? Is to basically consider your family as a little association that's more than just blood. It's also that there's something beyond that, and this is, I think, the ultimate solution there. Now, there's more to it than that. Of course, it's not just it's not just like ancestor worship or bust. At the same time, these peoples also had a different kind of association as well, and this comes down to us in the Germanic branches, the Mannerbund. So this is a kind of like a semi-voluntary association, usually of like youths that banded together as basically a sort of band of brothers. They had this what's called Sippa kinship, which is basically kinship based on oath taking. This would be a more sort of realistic beginning for folks to be able to build something in the modern world, right? Because it's not easy to just kind of start, lay an altar and start a hearth and begin it with your own family. You need more than that. As we were saying, you need community. You need other people. So this kind of Mannerbund, or actually the Indo-European word for it is Choreos, basically an association of men who have each other's back, a band of brothers that protect each other, look out for each other, and protect each other's women and family and everything like that. That's a good place to start, and that itself has a religious dimension that kind of goes beyond this discussion. But you could see that it starts with the guys that you go hunting with, or that you play sports with, or that you work out with, or whatever. That's kind of where it starts. And this is so here I am again, sort of semi-contradicting myself. I think that it needs to be a religious association. That's the solution. But as well, the Mannerbund is a kind of beginning for that. And eventually that's kind of what grows up into the clan sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think those that kind of Mannerbund ideal, men coming together, always produces some fruit. There's a lot of benefit in just having men in those spaces like that. I even see it with my lacrosse team, for example. Guys are coming together, they're battling out on the field, all establishing a shared kind of struggle. And you see it outside of the sport as well, guys building families. Then you see guys, having babies, raising kids together. Now, it's not all positive, of course, because it's not, not like lacrosse is just entirely based with every guy. Some guys are into degenerate, drinking and casual sex, but you see that positivity come out of being a part of a team, having shared goals and shared struggles. So I think if you can establish that, you're well on your way to building the kind of roots and foundations that we need to take it to the next level.
Yeah, most definitely. It's that's kind of where it will start for us. I think is a sort of an association of men that have something in common, and it seems like the family is the strongest association, and I think ultimately it is. But it can get a run for its money out of something like the war band or whatever, like men who have been through a trial together. I mean, in the Bronze Age, maybe your lacrosse team would have been a bunch of guys going out on a cattle raid or going on a bride kidnapping expedition or something like that. It's a little different today. The stakes are a little bit lower, but like, you take
this is the second time we endorse bride kidnapping on this show, for those keeping count at home.
That's great. I'm glad I can contribute to that. Um, but you think of something like a band of guys or a troop of guys who have had an experience together in war. Uh, this is an association. There's a bond there that might even be stronger than the family. It's men who have been through trials together. So if it's one thing to sort of like go and like go drink beers with guys and go play basketball on weekends and stuff like that. I don't know if that alone is gonna really do it. I don't think that's gonna make you die for somebody else's family necessarily. But what I'm sort of driving at here is that it's the going through of trials. It's you've been through hell and back together. That's what builds a real band of brothers. Um, and it's the same thing, like in a super degenerated sense. This is what makes gangs so integral as well, is that they have been through. They're obviously sort of on the wrong side of the law. Stakes are very high. They need to stick together, and a lot of what keeps these gangs together, apart from the sort of like mutually assured destruction of the association, is just the fact that they've been through hell, and that these are your boys. These are the guys that you've done all this stuff with, and that that you've risked life and limb for, and you can get this sort of same sense. In an attenuated way with going out hunting with guys, that there's something primal about that bonds men together, and it's the sense of life and death basically that is most purely expressed in the guys who have been at war together. So basically that's how you build an association of men who will live and die for each other, is by going through trials together. So this is something for men to seek out, and I think that's a way to sort of build this artificial, quote unquote, artificial association of the manor bund in kind of a hurry.
I think that's just it. Is those shared trials, making sure that you have a way to compete in the world together and to build from there, because that's how we form the proper bonds that establish the roots. So the better we get at doing that, the better our organization capacity will be.
And let's add to that learning the skills we'll need to form those guilds and organizations, and maybe go work for Mike here once he starts the law
we
firm.
we are taking volunteers. I'll tell you that much. Like I said before,
everyone who's listening who hasn't even a possibly useful skill should look into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
it's
not
hard to find
people
guys
doing the
who can
actual
help.
lifting. A lot of guys consuming a lot of content, not a lot of guys doing the heavy lifting. But that's where the real fun of it is.
Yeah, well, we need both, of course. And, we need an audience, but at the same time, we also need help with things too. And we're very thankful for all volunteering and everything like that. It's great. It's fun to be part of it, actually, guys. I'm on one side of it, and the volunteers are helping out with everything. And it seems to me like that they subjectively get a lot of satisfaction out of it, especially the guys who help us like edit text together and stuff like that. So there's so many things that we need. Anybody who wants to help, by all means.
Can you list off some of the tasks just quickly that you do? You need like marketers, people sharing social media, making up graphics, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, probably one of the things that we could use a lot is like graphic design. That would be very helpful. We always need more proofreaders and editors and things like that. That is an immensely helpful thing. And we've had a few guys that have basically like helped us edit together whole texts. Like, one guy has edited together more than one text for us. We're immensely grateful for that. It really helps us. It basically just helps us red pill more people more quickly. So that's really helpful. As for other things, we could always use guys that have web skills and programming skills and things like that. That's very helpful. Guys who can do kind of like research, or who have specifically who have like an area of expertise that they know a lot about. That's very helpful. There's all kinds of things, and it's probably many things that I'm not thinking of that guys are like, oh well, they could never use this, but you never know. Maybe that's exactly what we're looking for. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff with us. Any help is of course welcome. That's and it's just nice to hear from people too. It's nice to know that people are willing and that appreciate what we do and everything like that. Believe me, this is not an easy gig for me. I could make way more money doing what I used to do or some other thing. It's not super lucrative for me personally. It's really more of a labor of love, and I put in more hours to this than I've put into any job ever by a long shot. So it really helps when people just sort of get in touch and say, "Hey, I like what you do." That kind of makes it worthwhile for me. So it's just nice to hear that too.
Yeah, well, you do really great work, and I can say the stuff you do makes me proud to be Canadian. You being a fellow Leaf, and I think anyone that wants to get involved really should go put their work out there, because you have certain skills, and you might be putting them towards some shitty gay corporation, but I can tell you that's going to be way more fulfilling when you put it towards a venture like this, something that actually means something, something that you actually value.
Yeah, most definitely. It would be most gratefully received. So, and not even just by us. There's lots of guys in the wider sphere who need assistance with this kind of stuff. I mean, if you reached out to like basically any of the people in our sphere, whether it's Morgoth or Dave Martell or like Frothy Midyord or any of these guys, and you just say, hey, I've got like, an hour a week where I just basically don't have anything to do and I can like help you with something. Is there anything I can do? I'm sure any of these guys would absolutely jump on that, and that would really would be very much appreciated by them as well, because it's a hard road for dissident content creators. Guys have the idea that there's a lot, there's a lot of money in this, and like occasionally, like people call various of us in the sphere grifters. It's like, if you're a grifter and you're trying to grift on the radical right, you are in the wrong business. Like, you're the worst grifter ever, because there's very there's very little to grift, or basically guys are usually working on kind of shoestring budgets and things like that. So any help for any of the guys in our sphere, I'm sure would be super appreciated. So yeah.
And anything else you want to shill?
Yeah, we got a few things actually. So pretty much everything that we do, you can find on imperiumpress.org. If you go to the landing page, you'll see, our books and things like that. But look at the top, there's a menu. You'll see we've got podcasts, all kinds of stuff. Donation pages, things like that. But one of the things that there are basically two things that we've started very recently that I think guys are going to be kind of interested in. One is we've got a Substack now. So basically, I'm writing a regular blog or series of articles. I just put one out tonight, actually, that I thought was pretty good. So you're getting kind of like long form written content from me, Mike, editor-in-chief of Imperium Press. And I think that's really where I shine. I think I'm a much better writer than I am a publisher or a speaker or anything like that. So, and it helps us when guys actually subscribe to our Substack. It really helps us because we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. Basically, at some stage, the payment processors are going to get wise, are going to drop us, and if we have a variety of income streams, like through Substack and through other things, that makes us that much more anti-fragile. So Substack is one way to do that. Another way that is going to help us out a lot is we've got a new podcast. I'm still doing Imperium Cast with Joel Davis, but I've got a new one with Dave Martell where it's called Culture Dads. And what it is, basically, it's a couple of fathers and community leaders who are it's just him and I. They're basically discussing cultural issues. So usually what it is we'll either review a movie or talk about a music genre or a band or a video game or a genre of video games or something. Something like that. And basically it's like we just put out episodes where we talk about cultural stuff. So it's very, very different than the Imperium cast. It's basically the podcast about right-wing aesthetics, and viewing cultural touchstones. Like the first podcast episode we did, we basically reviewed The Godfather from a right-wing folkish perspective, tribal perspective, and guys really responded well to that. So we put that up on our YouTube channel. If you go to our website, imperiumpress.org, you click on podcasts, you'll be able to go straight to that. What we're going to do is basically we're going to post we posted the full Godfather episode on YouTube, but we're also going to post everything coming up. Basically, we'll post about like half of the episode or a quarter of the episode on YouTube, and the rest will be behind a paywall. So if guys want to sign up for that, that would help us as well. Lots of stuff coming up as well. We got hardcovers about to drop in the next few days, and guys have been clamoring for this for ages. So it's a really super busy time for us. There's a lot of new content coming out, and of course new books. We've got the book Populist Delusion by Academic Agent just dropped. It's amazing. Basically it's an updated version of James Burnham's Machiavellians. It sort of takes all of the thinkers that Burnham talked about in that book, and it sort of talks about them, adds Burnham himself into the mix, and adds a bunch of other people as well, sort of that came after them. And it really sort of fills a Nemesis-shaped hole in our catalog, because we had to delist Nemesis, unfortunately, about a year ago. So it's a great book. We're continuing to publish books. We got new podcasts. We got new blog. It's just extremely, extremely busy for us. So yeah, there's a lot there.
Well, you sold me on that show. I'll definitely go check that out.
I'm going to go listen to that while I work today.
Well, thanks for coming on, Mike. I really appreciate it. It was good hearing from you. You have a lot of great ideas. I think we're converging on a lot of similar thoughts, and hopefully everyone goes and checks all your stuff out, and we get more out of you. Thanks, man.
Oh, thank you very much. And I know we kind of digressed a little bit from the Canadian content there, but it's nice to talk to fellow Canadians. It's nice to discuss these things. Reminds me of the old country. That's where my heart is. So yeah, Canadians definitely take pride in your history and your culture and your heritage, because there's a lot to be proud of there.